Hey everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to revisit something I mentioned in a previous video where I talked about my notes, and I'll link that below. I want to talk specifically about my book, this big, thick hardback I wrote during the pandemic. It's basically my career. I don't know if I'd call it my autobiography or my memoirs. I'm not exactly sure what the difference is between those. But after moving up to Seattle and not knowing anybody, and it was the middle of the pandemic and everything was shut down, I decided to collect all my notes, whether they were physical or digital. I digitized a lot of the physical ones. And then I started organizing them by company and inside by by product. To give you an idea, and I think I've mentioned this somewhere else, my Fallout notes alone, digitally, are 86 pages long. And that's not a page per note. That's the notes basically sentence, sentence, paragraph, sentence. They're everything I could find from I don't have any notes from Cybron Pegasus. I do have notes from Interplay. Those are all physical. Those are things I tended to write down where if I was going to have a meeting and I didn't want to forget something, I'd write something down. That's also the time in my life where I started journaling. Didn't do it a lot, but I'd often go home at night and write, today, blah, 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 blah. I started journaling really hard during Troika, and I kept it up a lot during Carbine. I did it less when I went to Obsidian, but I picked it back up for Outer Worlds. So the quantity of my notes is uneven over my career, but I do have a lot of notes. And because Troika was my company, I've got a big chunk of emails. I have every computer I had at that company. I have the backup of it. I have a backup image of the hard drive. Unfortunately, often when those were backed up, since I didn't do art, I often didn't have art on it, certainly not art models. So that's why I don't have a lot of things like, here's a model from Arcanum. I have code from Arcanum, but not things like art. A lot of design or a lot of data files from Arcanum weren't kept on my machine, so I don't have those either. I'd have to crack open the DAT file like anybody else, but I've got a lot of stuff. Like I said, the Fallout notes alone are 86 pages. The book, when I finished writing it and I printed it out, it was 558 pages long, and that's broken up into 345 pages of the book itself, and then a bunch of appendices that are about 213 pages. And I'll talk about why I have appendices in a second. But I had 6 people read it. 3 of them were people that I've made games with. My name and their name appear together in a game that shipped. I figured that would help keep me grounded to the facts. I also asked 2 game developers, who I've never made a game with, but I really trust, to read it as well and give me feedback. I also asked my brother to read it, because he's 2 years older than me. We went through the whole D&D phase together, when we got our first game console, which was an Atari VCS. We went through that. I mean, we had a Pong unit before that, but I'm talking about something that you could switch games out on. We went through that whole phase together. I got my Atari 800 when I was 14, so he was 16. So a lot of the stories he could give me feedback on were early stuff that people I worked with later didn't know. After every person read it, I went back and made a lot of editing. The stories were made clearer. Sometimes I reorganized the order of things, because sometimes a narrative makes sense if all the events associated with it are clumped together, even if that means I then have to jump back a little bit to tell the next story. Some readers didn't like that. Most of them did. That was another thing. I couldn't get all the readers to agree on all their feedback. Some side stories were so disconnected from my main narrative that several of them recommended, and I did it. I moved them into appendices. That's why there's so many appendices. I got feedback, and I'm going to go over the feedback I got that was common. So each person gave me various feedback, but the following 4 overall statements were came from all 6 people. First one was that the book is a little dry. Many of them expressed surprise because they said my verbal stories are very interesting and engaging, but the same story written down came across as dry. One of them said that when she read it, hearing my voice, then it was interesting. But for stories she had never heard me tell, she said it seemed dry. And I realized it's because I wasn't hearing you tell it. And I'm like, I don't know how to fix that. Well, I did eventually figure out how to fix that. I just told the stories here. That's what this channel is. I'm telling stories. That a lot of them are from this book. Several people said I came across a little mean-spirited in the book. Even though when I tell the same story verbally, it doesn't sound that way. Most of the people when I made this channel were like, wow, you're so positive. And I'm like, I like to think so. I don't know what to take of it other than all of them, even though all of them said I came across a little mean, all of them pointed to different parts of the book and different stories about what was being mean. And they didn't always agree. Like somebody said I sounded mean in one story and somebody said, no, I think you sounded fine. You were very level-headed about that. And I'm like, okay. Related to that, people said there's a lot of blame I put on other people in the book. Even though I give people a ton of credit as well, I also take a lot of blame myself for the things I said I did wrong. When I pointed out to them that I give way more credit than I give out blame, and also there's more blame assignment to me in the book than to other people, they all went, yeah, it still feels like you're blaming people. Especially if ever the person I'm blaming, as one person put out, they said, whenever you blame someone who wasn't your peer, if they were above you, it felt a little like, I distrust management. And if it was below you, it felt like punching down. And I'm like, yeah, but what do you want me to say when I get to some part of the story and I'm like, well, here's what went wrong? Should I say it was my fault, even if it wasn't? Or should I just not, should I get vague and not say whose fault it is? Which you will be able to know because if I say, oh yeah, this is where I messed up this, and then I go, and then this was messed up. You kind of know I'm blaming someone. So I didn't know what to do with that. And then the final one that came up was there was disagreement over some of the events from the people I'd worked with. What was interesting about that was almost always about event ordering, because one thing I avoided doing in the book, I never ever projected people's internal thoughts or feelings. I never said, this is why this person did this, or this is why this person said this. I just said, they did this, they said this. In fact, when I explained that to one of my readers, he said, oh, that may be why it sounds dry. And I said, yeah, but I don't want to guess why this person made this comment. I don't want to guess why this person did this thing. Sometimes I don't even know. Sometimes I have a very good guess, but I don't know. And so I just tried to avoid intention. Whenever I described other people, I'd say they did this, they said this. And I often have evidence of it in the sense of I have other people who saw them do it or say it, and I have my notes. So I ended up shelving this book, literally and figuratively, and I sent an email out to my 6 readers. I said, and I won't read it to you because I don't want it to be spontaneous. Here's what I told them. I'm now shelving the book, literally and figuratively. It is too difficult to reconcile contradictory feedback, and when I approached people I had worked with to confirm stories and credits for work, they had contradictory responses too. In fact, one of my stories was validated by 2 different ex-coworkers, only for me to find a time-stamped email later that proved that all 3 of us were remembering the event wrong. Things got so heated that I contacted a grad school buddy who got his PhD in neurobiology, studying learning and memory, and who is now an award-winning professor in the field. He listened to my description of the book and its reviews, and he nodded the whole time, and when I was done, he told me I could never resolve what had really happened, not by using my notes from the time, which could be biased by my own interpretation of the events, or by relying on other witnesses who had their own biases and frequently remembered the wrong things. He told me about studies where people remembered provably wrong things, like the weather on a certain date, or where they were when a major event happened, such as JFK's assassination, or the destruction of the Twin Towers in New York City. He said that those people often denied the evidence put in front of them, that they were wrong. He said, I would never get people to agree on what really happened, and that such memories were worse for extreme events, meaning people will misremember disproportionately their own contributions to the highest and lowest rated games we worked on. Specifically, he said, they will have worked harder and more on the best games, and less so on the bad ones. And I was like, He could tell I felt down about his explanation, but he reminded me that everybody did that. My recollections may be as wrong as my coworkers, but they're my recollections, not theirs. He reminded me that I was writing a memoir and not a definitive history on what happened in the making of those games. In fact, he doubted a definitive history could ever be written, so a memoir was the next best thing. He said that by including the good things with the bad, by taking credit as well as blame for many of the events in the book, my memoirs were probably the best reconstruction of those events that I could ever make. So I finished the book, printed it out, shelved it. I feel a certain sense of relief that it can be done, that it's done, it's documented, and it's the best I can do. So, I will almost certainly never publish this because I'm sure as soon as I do, there'll be a lot of people saying, that's not what happened, or you got this wrong, or whatever. I do enjoy reading. I finished Sid Meier's memoir, and it was awesome. But I could tell when I read it, there were things that, like, he left something out there because there'd be a jump with an unexplained gap. I'm looking forward to reading John Romero's book, which just came out. I haven't gotten it yet. So I can see that there's an interest in these books. I just am not sure that unless my book could be edited to get rid of all of the fundamental issues that all 6 readers saw, which was it being dry, kind of mean and blame assigny, and disagreeing on several of the events. Unless I can get that edited and fixed, and I'm not sure the disagreement part could ever be fixed, I'm just not sure what to do with it. So I'm basically just going to put it on my bookshelf and leave it there. And I wanted to put this in one video because whenever people ask about it, especially when they watch the About My Notes video, I feel like I have to respond, and I'd rather just do it once and then people can refer to this video from then on. So I hope that answers all the questions that I can answer about my book.